And in 1997, I feel like I lost my voice because I felt like the advice that I gave to my best friend. I help people to write their books and tell their stories. And the reason why I do that is because I know what it's like to not have a voice. I know what it feels like to not feel seen and to not feel heard. And I went throughout life feeling that way. So I grew up in Decatur, Georgia, in an abusive home. My father was an alcoholic who abused my mother regularly. And so as I watched this, it just made me feel very afraid. And because of that, I always felt that I had to keep a lot inside. I didn't know what would happen to me if I spoke out. So I eventually went through life, went through a lot of ups and downs. By the time that I was 14, I was dancing in clubs and really was spiraling out of control. Then ultimately in 2015 is when everything changed and I was involved in a fatal car accident that killed the man that I was dating. And that's when everything turned around. It's important for people to find their voice because it's important for everybody to feel seen and feel heard. Like I said, I know what it's like to not feel seen and feel heard. And that was one of the most crushing parts of my life. So it's like I was always searching for a way to find my voice, find myself, and find myself in this world. And I found myself looking for it in men, looking for it in, extracurricular activities and things of that nature. So that was definitely a journey for me, especially in my marriage and finding my voice. In 1997, like I said, I was always outgoing and ambitious, and I would always push my friends to do greater. And in 1997, I feel like I lost my voice because I felt like the advice that I gave to my best friend is what got her murdered. So when I met her, we met in a club and we got along really good and we just vibed. And so eventually we became friends. She had a little girl, I had a little girl, and we would hang out. And she was in an abusive relationship with her daughter's father. And so I would tell her, girl, you can do better. You can do better than that. He's always trying to control you. He was taking her money and abusing her and things of that nature. And I was like, you can do better and do something greater. So ultimately, she left him. And then she got her own place. She got her own car. We traveled together. We did a lot of different things together. And one day I called her phone and she didn't call me back. And so I'm calling her phone and I'm calling her phone and she's not answering. And I'm like, this is really strange. Like, this isn't like her because we were supposed to meet up that day. And so eventually a friend of ours called and said that he saw on the news that there had been a murder-suicide. And on the news, it said that a man killed a woman and then killed himself. And they said her name. But I didn't have a way of reaching out to anyone in her family because I didn't know anyone in her family. So I was just trying to verify that the information was true. So I called all the hospitals. We were calling all the morgues. We were calling everybody that we could find. And we ultimately got in touch with the coroner. And he then verified that she had been murdered. And that's when a shift happened for me. And I felt like, even though I was trying to help my friend, I felt like my advice got her murdered. And I shut down a long time after that because I didn't know if what I was saying was right anymore. I didn't know if what I was saying was really helping people. And I can still remember like going through that process, going to the funeral and just seeing her in that coffin. And you could still see the hole in her head because the makeup didn't cover it up well. And the look on her face with so much anger, like she died that way. And so much came over me because I was like, well, what if I had not told her to leave? Because ultimately we found out what happened was that she started dating someone else, which I knew about. And her daughter's father was starting to threaten her. And so I told her, I said, you have to stop letting him come to the house to babysit the baby. You have to stop leading him on to make him think that maybe there's something else going on. And so he was stalking her for a little while, and she was like, oh, that's nothing. He's not going to do anything. And then he was saying, I'm going to kill you and all this. And she was like, oh, he's not going to do it. I said, Martella, I really think that you should take more precaution with this situation. So the last time that I talked to her was like a few days before that, and she said that he was outside her window. And I said, Montella, you have to call the police or do something about this situation because I feel like this is getting ready to go somewhere else. And 2 days later, I never heard from her again. So I just wish that I just started to have these feelings like, well, maybe if I had just stayed out of her business, maybe if, you know, she had stayed with him, even though he was abusive, she would still be alive. You know, maybe had I just not said anything, that she would still be here today. So that situation is one of the biggest things that really caused a shift. And for many years, I just kind of held my tongue and didn't say what I wanted to say. Montella's abuse was emotionally abused. I think he did fight her sometimes physically, but from what I knew and for the short amount of time that I knew her, I believe it was more financially. He was financially abusing her, you know, taking all her money when she worked, made her pay all the bills. He stayed home. And then, of course, the emotional abuse, saying that nobody else would want her but him. She was fat, she was ugly, and all these things. So all of that stuff she started to believe it, basically. And because she believed it, she didn't believe that she could do any better. So I would tell her, you can do so much better. You know, like there's a whole other life out here. You know, you can get your own place, you can get your own car, you don't have to take care of him. You can actually just take care of you and your daughter. And she eventually got inspired, and that's exactly what she did. So she left him and she was living her best life. You know, we were traveling, we went to Miami. Her daughter was happy, she was happy, she was seeing somebody else. And then that's when he started showing up and stalking her and showing up at her window and things of that nature. So I was advising her at the time because she would have him come over her house to babysit their daughter. I said, no, you should take your daughter to wherever he is, or, you know, maybe a family member's house, and have someone in between do the talking where you guys weren't interacting that way. And so ultimately she didn't listen. And so she was still allowing him to come to the house. Now, this is interesting, and I did not learn this until 20 some odd years later. So her murder happened in 1997, February of 1997 to be exact. Her daughter reached out to me on Twitter after 20 something years. And when Her mother died. She was 2 years old. She saw that I had a tweet about her mother because I was honoring her mother. Even 20 some odd years ago, I was still talking about my best friend. And she Googled her mother's name and found my tweet. And she reached out to me on social media and she was like, "Did you know my mother?" And I said, "Of course I knew your mother." And I said, "I knew you too." And she was like, "Really?" I said, "Yes." This is so, this broke my heart. So when my friend was murdered, even though she was murdered by her daughter's father, her daughter's father still took in their daughter and raised her. They never told her about her mother. Hey. So when she told me that she didn't know her mother and that she barely even had a picture of her mother, and she asked me, she said, "Did my mother love me?" And I said, "Yes, she loved you very much." And I hate that his family buried her legacy. Thank you. His family buried her memories, buried her story, buried her legacy. She knew absolutely nothing about her mother. And she was a young woman in college searching for herself and her identity. And all she knew was what his family told her about her mother, and that she didn't love her, and that she was a whore, and that she was doing all these things, when that was not my friend at all. She was trying to make the best way that she could for her and her daughter. That's why she left. That's why he murdered her. And unfortunately, her family didn't take their daughter in because her mother was on drugs. And her family had a lot of drug abuse, so no one was there. Her daughter wasn't even at the funeral. So I met up with her daughter and I built a relationship with her daughter, and she was in college and doing very well. So happy. I reached out to Montella's mother. I found her and I let them meet for the very first time. So my best friend's daughter got to meet her biological grandmother, Montella's mother. And we went to lunch, and her mother began to tell me that Montella was still giving her daughter's father hope that maybe they would get back together, which I did not know. So that was like a missing piece for me, which kind of made it all make sense as to why he was still coming to the house and then the new guy was coming to the house. And I told her this very dangerous territory, you know. But she was so beautiful. She was so lovely, so lively. And I just want to keep her memory alive because no one ever knew, like she would have know who she would have become. And I'm glad to see that her daughter is doing well. I'm glad to see that I was able to give her daughter her mother, and I was able to give her daughter her grandmother. And now she's been connected to her mother's side of the family, which his side of the family kept from her for all these years. And for many years, I felt very guilty about that because, of course, you're going to struggle with that. It's like she was doing fine before I came along, even though she was being abused, she was still alive, you know. And we would talk and she would be like, I hate my life. I want to die so bad. She would say that all the time. And I would say, Montella, stop wishing death on yourself. I said, your words are powerful. Words are powerful. And she would say it all the time. I wish I would just die. My mother's on drugs and nobody loves me and I'm with this man and I have to figure this out. And ultimately, that's what happened. So that's why I talk to people, especially my own children, about the power of your words. They are extremely powerful. You have to speak life. And I just wish that I had more time. I just wish I had more time with her. We were two peas in the pod. And when we found her, the coroner said she was so young. She was 20 years old. 20 years old. He said, and he had tears in his voice. I could hear it in his voice. He was like, she was so young. So that's one of the reasons why I do what I do. I've experienced so much tragedy and tragic and trauma situations, but I push through. And I just want to inspire other people to let them know that you can push through too. So in March of 2015, I was involved in a fatal car accident. I watched my man take his last breath. And that's what really threw me into this purpose. All of my trauma and tragedy, I've just turned it around for good, As I watched him taking his last breaths, I knew that my life could never be the same. I knew that I could not go back. And we were just riding in a car accident. In the car, just having a regular conversation. A car swerved in front of us. I told him to watch out. We had been in an argument a little bit before that, so his mind was spiraling out of control, I could see. And I was telling him to just calm down. We'll talk about it later. We agreed that we would talk about the discussion later. The car swerved in front of us again. He then swerved. I took control of the steering wheel. We went flipping across the expressway. He got ejected over 200 feet and ultimately crushed every organ in his body. I was saved by angels. But he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. I was wearing a seatbelt. My son, who was in the back seat, was wearing a seatbelt. He flipped out of his seatbelt and landed in the front seat. Had we flipped one more time, my son would have gone through the front window sill. His seatbelt wasn't working, and I told him for weeks to get the seatbelt fixed. And he was like, oh, I don't need a seatbelt. I said, you need a seatbelt. Even his mother was telling him, get the seatbelt fixed. And so I watched him put that seatbelt on. And this is another thing. I wish I would have said something and said that seatbelt is defected. But he knew it was defected. Like he knew it was a defective seatbelt. He put it on and put it behind his back, and we drove off. And the seatbelt was the thing that would have saved him. When I went to the hospital, the doctors could not believe that we were in the same car accident because I didn't have any scratches. I didn't have any broken bones. But every organ in his body was crushed. And that's what led me into my purpose. I heard a voice speak to me and said, Shannon, it's time for you to write the book. It's time for you to stop playing with your life. You've been saved for a time such as this. You've been saved so many times. When will you finally get the point that you're destined to do something greater. Stop clubbing, stop hanging out, stop doing all the stuff that you were doing, and step into your purpose. So when he passed away, that's when I stepped into my purpose, wrote my book. And since then, I've been able to help hundreds of people write and publish their books. Now, taking them to television so that they can spread their message of inspiration and hope to inspire others. Because I believe that everybody has a story that matters. Everybody has a story worth hearing. Everybody can learn from everybody. You don't have to be a celebrity to change the world. So that's my mission. I get so much gratification from helping other people to see how they've been able to overcome so much trauma and triumph in their lives, how they are being transformational and inspirational for others, just to let people know that we're not alone. The thing that you're struggling with, somebody else has already died from that thing. You're still alive. You still have a chance. You still have a voice in this world. And to help other people find their voices and find their statement, their message that they want to share to the world. The woman who felt like she didn't have a voice now helps other people find theirs. So I really hope you enjoyed the show. Share it out to all your family and friends. I really hope that it has inspired you and impacted you. And I hope that you will be able to find your voice too. Thank you so much for watching Story to Story with Shannon.